Good morning, Trump's family. Have a good day and God bless you. Thank you for always watching and subscribing to the channel. Alright, without further ado, let's get into the news. And we've been covering this classified documents that Biden has been obviously caught hiding from the DOJ and the American public, classified information that he did not have access to while being vice president and having it stored in his garage at his house in Delaware, where he hosts lots of meetings that are kept from the public. And of course, were his Biden Institute, which he was sharing office space with the Chinese government. So lots of issues going on here. But one thing is very wrong, is that the House of Representatives now have requested the documents, the visitor logs to his Delaware home, and all of a sudden, they don't have them, which means to me is that they destroyed evidence. They're destroying things that would obviously show that Biden was working with foreign entities possibly, which I think many of us already know that he has, and now is in a cover-up mode. This is going to get way more spicier as we continue to go through the week. So let's get to take a look what we have here. This is coming to us from Wayne Dupree and the House of Representatives. The Oversight Committee is now requesting the visitor logs. Well, being reported by Peter Doocy is that the White House is saying there are no visitor logs. So one of two things have happened: either they had not been keeping visitor logs or they have destroyed the visitor logs, which would not be a far stretch of the imagination. If you know how Democrats roll, we know Hillary Clinton had no problem destroying her tablets and Blackberries. We know Mueller's team had no problem erasing all the text messages and information they had on their cell phones before they turned over to Congress. So we know these people are not working in good faith. So come down here, the AP is reporting that the newly empowered House Republicans on Sunday demanded the White House turn over all information related to its searches that uncovered classified document that President Joe Biden's home and former office in the wake of more records found at his Delaware residence. We have a lot of questions that Representative James Comer, chairman of the House Oversight and Accountability Committee, Comer, who is Republican from Kentucky, said he wants to see all documented communications related to the searches by the Biden team, as well as visitor logs of the president's home in Wilmington, Delaware from January 20, 2021. To the President Time, he said that it aims to determine who might have had access to classified material and how the records are got there. The White House on Saturday said it discovered 5 additional pages of classified document at the Biden home on Thursday, the same day as a special counsel was appointed to review the matter. Later on Sunday, White House Chief of Staff Ron Klein criticized Comer. The searches by Biden representatives with the Justice Department was beginning to investigate, said Biden's mishandling classified materials raises the issue of whether he has jeopardized our national security. Comer demanded the White House provide all relevant information, including visitor logs, by the end of the month. Appearing on CNN, stated unit, Comer referred to Biden's home as a crime scene, though he acknowledged that it is not clear whether any laws were broken. Well, with an update here coming from Fox News, White House says there are no visitor logs from Biden's Wellington home, Peter Doocy reports. That means there's a couple things that may have happened or could have happened or may have happened. 1. They didn't keep logs. 2. They destroyed the logs. Or 3. The DOJ is covering up the logs so that way the Republicans' Oversight Committee cannot get their hands on it. Because releasing these logs would obviously implicate the Biden crime family to 4 entities for an interest of peddling foreign influence, and using that to buy influence within the realm of the nation that he is sworn to protect, right? And so what he has been doing is selling his name, selling this country out for a profit. And they don't want that to get out to the American public, because Blue Balloon on that media is doing their best to spin this as best as they can. But the more information that is coming out, it's not looking good for the Biden regime. So we'll continue to keep a close eye on this as it's getting worse and more serious for the Biden regime. And I have a suspicion that they will force him to resign in order to save him embarrassment. And then we'll turn it over to Kamala Harris. I think this will happen sometime this year. I don't have a clear date on that, obviously. But that's what I think, that's what I feel that it's heading to. And this is all, layering up just how Rush Limbaugh said it was going to happen. So I'm curious, what do you guys think is going to happen? And then some significant news. What happened, California? What happened, little Gavin Newsom? You're constantly going on about how great California is. We have the greatest economy, the greatest social programs. It's the greatest place on planet Earth. You manage HUD Republicans can't compete with us. And they always say the same thing. They always mention the same thing. California year on here is running a surplus. You can't tell us that we're being irresponsible with our money and all of our social programs when we're running a budget surplus every year. Well, not so fast. Let's just say that statement. That claim isn't exactly aging. Well, these days. It turns out that California is dying. And of course, we've known that on surface level. From a cultural perspective. We've seen the businesses fleeing. We've seen people fleeing. It's the most fleed state in the nation as disgruntled California residents flee to the greener pastures of literally anywhere that's not California. But it goes beyond that. We're now learning that California isn't running a surplus at all. In fact, California is supposedly $22+ billion in debt. You muck California surplus. All these California left droids crapping all over red states claiming they're so much better at managing money. Look at us. We're a blue state with all these social programs and we're running a surplus. That argument, that talking point, is officially dead. Let me show you guys exactly what I mean. Another example of leftwards running a cash cow directly into the ground. Alright, folks. Take a look at this headline. After years of budget surpluses, California is headed towards a $22.5 billion deficit. Sacramento, California. From a budget perspective, the first 4 years of Governor Gavin Newsom, his time in office has been a fairy tale, a seemingly endless flow of money that paid to enact some of the country's most progressive policies while acting as a bulwark against a tide of conservative rulings on abortion and guns from the U.S. Supreme Court. But just days in a second term, the dream appeared to be ending. Tuesday, Newsom announced that California likely won't collect enough money in taxes to pay for all of its obligations, leaving a $22.5 billion hole in its budget. The deficit was not a surprise. Newsom and the state's budget writers have been signaling for well over a year that California was sailing into economic headwinds. The news on Tuesday was Newsom offering his plan of what to do about it. Notably, Newsom chose not to dip into the state's $35.6 billion savings account, and he proposed no significant cuts to major programs and services, including vowing to protect programs that pay for all 4-year-olds to go to kindergarten and cover the health expenses of low-income immigrants living in the country without legal permission. Instead, Newsom plans to delay some of the spending while shifting some expenses to other funding sources outside of the state's general fund. He has proposed $9.6 billion in cuts, including canceling a planned $750 million payment on a federal loan the state took to cover unemployment benefits for those who lost their jobs during the pandemic. Whether that plan holds will depend on what the state's finances look like after April 15, when most residents file the state income tax returns. Newsom and legislative leaders don't have to approve a spending plan until the end of June. The fairy tale is over. This idea that you can just endlessly spend money and get nothing in return, this idea that you can just subsidize people's lives, that you can enable homelessness and even go to the extent of subsidizing people's drug addictions, that you could also incentivize and subsidize illegal immigrants and illegal immigration. The woke California dream is over. And that's exactly what it was all along, a dream, a mirage. Remember, not too long ago Gavin Newsom was promising checks for everyone. Inflation has gotten bad, folks. And we're going to tackle this inflation by injecting more monies into the California economy, the stupidest thing anyone could have ever imagined. Well, would you look at that? Could you imagine that? It turns out that all of these ridiculous, irresponsible, woke policies that Gavin Newsom told you the state could afford, because they're the greatest state on earth with the non-stop budget surpluses. It was all bogus from the start. They couldn't afford it. They can't afford it. And California is now going broke. They have $36 billion in the state coffers, and they're expecting a $22.5 billion deficit next fiscal year. If that continues, that $36 billion state saving fund in the end isn't going to come close to covering the state's liabilities. But of course, in the end, reality, common sense always ends up winning, and the first stuff to get cut are the nonsense garbage activist spending plans. Newsom appeared somewhat pessimistic about the future as he scaled back some of his ambitious climate proposals, cutting his much-heralded 5-year $54 billion investment to $48 billion. Newsom tried to downplay that cut, arguing the $48 billion is still one of the largest climate investments in the world, and that the state would seek to recover some of that lost money from other sources. Still, it was enough of a cut to anger some climate groups who had been heartened by the state's commitment to combating climate change in recent budgets. It's a reality setting in, and now Gavin Newsom is forced to cut a bunch of the social programs because California can no longer afford it. That's what happens when you implement these kinds of programs. And it's not just the programs themselves, because California in the past could have actually afforded many of these programs, but they overstep their boundaries. California is one of the most privileged places on Earth, I mean, just geographically alone. The fact that they're so close to Asia, and they control a massive port on the western coast, it makes them an economic powerhouse. And of course, they have Hollywood. California is the cultural empire of the world when it comes to entertainment. When it comes to tech, they're Silicon Valley, finance, everything, every industry. You could think of California has it all and bigger than anyone else. The amount of taxes that they're pulling in from these massive tech companies and all the industry puts them in a very privileged position, but they have let the state degrade to such an extent. And now so many people are leaving, people are struggling to survive, and especially businesses are struggling to survive, and now the whole thing is crumbling down before our very eyes. This is what happens when you go too far, when you get too cocky. And this is probably why Gavin Newsom spent millions of dollars running TV ads in Florida begging people to come back to California. It's another case of getting woke and going broke. Shifting your priorities, follow these fairy tale la-di-da plans instead of running the state with basic fiscal responsibility philosophy. You know, the article mentioned that Gavin Newsom during his first 4 years ran a surplus every year. It was a miracle, an economic miracle. Well, maybe he just took over a state was an economic engine that was firing on all cylinders, and on his watch since elected governor. Is it a coincidence that during those 4 years, with all the garbage policies that they've implemented, that all of a sudden California is on its way to a massive deficit, massive debt, going broke? Of course not. Correlation is causation. Gavin Newsom doesn't get credit for running surpluses and being a great governor. Gavin Newsom gets credit for taking a state that was running a surplus and running it into the damn ground like the good communist he is. It's literally the opposite of Governor Ron DeSantis. Ron DeSantis takes the state of Florida to the lowest unemployment rate in history, and even with collecting very moderate amount of taxes. That includes a 0% state income tax with the little taxes that they do collect on sales, homeownership, and from other sources. He's managed to actually bring the state to running a surplus, stacking billions of dollars in the state's rainy day fund. One heralded Democrat governor takes a state that's booming and turns it into a bust, and the top Republican governor takes a massive state and does the exact opposite. California is a failed socialist experiment, and it's really no surprise at all. Thank you very much. WWG1WGA. Hit the like button. Hit the subscribe button to watch the next episode. Goodbye. God bless.